November has been celebrated as Hip Hop History Month for quite some time, but this year the Senate passed a resolution making the event even a little more official. Check out Senate Resolution 331 that was passed this July, which made November officially Hip Hop History Month, as well as recognizing August as Hip Hop Recognition Month and August 11th as Hip Hop Celebration Day. We have quite a few books related to hip hop here in the Polley Music Library. There's a section on hip hop and rap if you look in the 781.649 area. And then, because music genres these days aren't so clear-cut, be sure to look around in the pop and rock areas too, like 781.66 and 781.64. Today I thought I'd highlight a few of the newer books we have in on hip-hop that approach the genre from a few different perspectives. The Marathon Don't Stop: The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle by Rob Kenner, Music 781.66, HUSSLE. Rapper and entrepreneur Nipsey Hussle led a short but very productive life, transitioning from being a member of the Crips at age 14 to being a community activist trying to raise up his neighborhood by the time he was killed at the age of 33. As several of his album titles related to the idea of treating life and struggle like a marathon, he sustained quite a pace as an artist, releasing 12 albums between 2005 and 2018, along with tons of mixtapes. Author Rob Kenner, who is one of the original editors of the legendary Vibe magazine, takes us through Hussle's whole journey, including context regarding his childhood and the conditions in LA generally, and Hussle's neighborhood more specifically, that he transcended and tried to change by creating more opportunities. Kenner interviewed Hussle several times throughout the rise of his career, and pieces together an intimate picture of his life and the business decisions he made to become more independent. Toward the end of his life, Hussle was able to draw attention to the kinds of economic conditions that can make a neighborhood rise or fall, the complexities of turning areas around, and systemic conditions faced by Black entrepreneurs. While this book mostly focuses on personal and music business matters, there are some great socioeconomic lessons built into the story of Nipsey Hussle too. JayZ, Made in America by Michael Eric Dyson, Music 781.66, JayZ. JayZ is one of the most successful people of the last century, much less one of the most famous and influential figures in hip-hop. His is a true rags-to-riches story, where he was raised by a single mother and didn't graduate high school, but has gone on to become a billionaire with involvement in a wide range of business ventures. And at the center of it all is hip-hop. Author Michael Eric Dyson has been teaching about JayZ and treating his lyrics as poetry at Georgetown University for a decade, and teaching about hip-hop more generally even longer than that. You can get a taste of his class by reading this book, which covers many aspects of JayZ's career, history, and lyrical genius. But the real focus here is on lyrical analysis. Dyson's approach to lyrics here is multifaceted and virtuosic, weaving historical and personal context into all of the right places to highlight JayZ's considerable lyrical skill. Yet, for its academic pedigree, this book feels very easy to read, too. A great place to start for both JayZ and a deep understanding of the kind of wordplay used in contemporary hip-hop. Sweat the Technique: Revelations on Creativity by Rakim with Bakiri Kitwana, Music 781.66 RAKIM. Rakim, who got his start in the 80s duo Eric B. and Rakim, is generally regarded as one of the most influential MCs of all time. His work brought a new level of musical and lyrical sophistication to hip-hop, introducing all kinds of new metrical conceptions and internal rhythms. He's generally attributed as the artist who introduced the idea of flow to MC styling too, taking things beyond the traditional sense of cadence in poetry. In Sweat the Technique, we get the inside scoop on how Rakim developed his style. In places, this book functions as a bit of an autobiography, with reminiscences from his youth and career. But the real focus is on how he taps into his experiences creatively. You'll get some great philosophical ideas about how Rakim thinks about phrasing, rhythm, and space, and tips about how he approaches working in studios and in live performance. A lot of his anecdotes throughout the book can have immediate and practical application toward your own work as an MC or recording or performing artist. And as he gradually tells the tale of his rise through the music industry, this book is just plain inspirational. I'd recommend this book both for fans of Rakim and aspiring hip-hop artists more generally. Hip Hop Raised Me by DJ Semtex, Music 781.66 DJS. Author DJ Semtex is probably more well known in the UK than the US, where he hosted a weekly hip-hop show for the BBC that lasted 16 years. Hip Hop Raised Me is his first book, and it's been very well received worldwide. It's a really comprehensive history of hip-hop that's packed with rare photos from all eras of the genre in gorgeous full color, performance photos, promo shots, album art, show posters, logos, you name it. There's plenty of text here too, but it's all so well represented visually, with timelines, great pull-out quotations, and fun visual representations of top albums and artists. Sometimes books that focus on the history of a genre can feel kind of stuffy, and I think this one transcends all of that by showing so much of the action and vibrancy of hip-hop throughout the book. It feels like it lands somewhere between a history book and a coffee table book overall, and it's the kind of book that hip-hop fans can really cherish and return to again and again. And Semtex does have a slightly different perspective on hip-hop than most American journalists and artists who have written books. Although the origins of hip-hop are pretty solidly American, there are more British artists featured here than one might expect, and the outside perspective helps to show hip-hop as a truly worldwide culture at this point. Hip-Hop Family Tree, graphic novels by Ed Piskor, Music 789.1649, PIS, Volume 1 through Volume 4. I wanted to get this series of books included in this talk to remind you that you can even find a few graphic novel formatted books in the Polley Music Library. The Hip Hop Family Tree series started life as an online illustrated series on Boing Boing, and then they were turned into an amazing 4-volume set of large format graphic novels. We have the whole set here, and these are just so cool. Volume 1 takes you back to the very early days of hip hop, starting with DJ Kool Herc's parties in the Bronx up to about 1981. And then each successive volume moves ahead chronologically by another couple of years, eventually taking us up to 1985. The illustrations are phenomenal, and then there are larger pin-up, page-sized illustrations at the end of each volume, along with recommended listening lists and an index so you can find your favorite early hip-hop artists with each book quickly. If you know someone who is more inclined to read graphic novels, these are a great set of books to check out. The Motherlode, 100 Plus Women Who Made Hip Hop by Clover Hope, Music 781.66 HOP. We have a few great books in Polley on the history of women's contributions to hip hop, and this is the latest arrival, which was just published this year. Unlike most of the others, which are typically set up in a long historical narrative style, the Motherlode mostly focuses on one artist at a time, with occasional small sections to connect points in history. Artists are featured in the book in mostly chronological order, leading right up to current chart-topping women like The Future, Lizzo, and Cardi B. Most artists are featured in articles of 2 to 3 pages, so while this isn't the best book for digging deep into individual artists' histories, it's a great starting point for realizing just how many talented women have been part of the history of hip-hop, as well as making it the vital genre that it remains today. And there are definitely more female hip-hop artists featured in this book than the other single volumes we have. This is one of those books that I would recommend both for someone new to hip-hop and also for hip-hop fans who might hope to bump into an artist or two with whom they're not already familiar. There is a listening recommendation included with each entry too. God Save the Queens, The Essential History of Women in Hip-Hop by Kathy Landoli, Music 781.66 IAN. Another recent addition to our collection is God Save the Queens. This is a well-written history of women in hip-hop that goes back to the foundational days of the genre and takes us right up to the present. Landoli herself has been a journalist involved with hip-hop for most of her career, dating back to 1999, and has written for magazines like Vibe and The Source, in addition to Rolling Stone, Billboard, and lots of hip-hop-focused websites. She uses her extensive experience in the hip-hop industry to create a unique narrative structure for this book. Sometimes she's drawing from her personal experiences. Sometimes she's writing like an historian, and sometimes she weaves in dialogue from her own interactions with hip-hop stars of the aughts and teens. The book breaks away with little interlude sections that paint individual stories too, working almost like the skits one finds on a lot of hip-hop albums. It's a very clever and readable structure, and even if you don't have a long history with hip-hop yourself, I think you'll find this book a lot of fun to read. The book's introduction tells a fascinating story from the very origins of hip-hop, from a perspective that I hadn't considered before. While it's pretty well known that DJ Kool Herc's Party in 1973 laid some serious groundwork for the kind of vibe and musical approach that hip-hop formed around, Wendoli notes that Kool Herc's sister Cindy was the real organizer behind the party and handled ticket sales at the door. Throughout the history of hip-hop, we find that women are an important part of the development of the scene. Like other forms of pop music, hip-hop's development revolved around a lot of male figures, but even in the early 80s, lots of women were coming on stage as MCs, both solo and as part of larger crews. There were early female DJs too, and groups like the Mercedes Ladies and the Sequence were all female groups all the way back in the 1970s. By the 80s, hip-hop was gaining traction and becoming profitable, and women continued to be active participants like Roxanne Shanti and Sparky D. Soon, female artists were hitting the charts, like MC Lyte, Salt and Peppa, and Moni Love. And things absolutely exploded by the 90s, a landmark decade for hip-hop taking over the airwaves. Through the course of the book, you'll hear from tons of major female hip-hop stars, checking in about how they've navigated a male-dominated industry so successfully, their takes on body image and objectification, sexuality and gender, and often being held to different standards than their male colleagues. It's a fascinating and riveting read. Black Masculinity and Hip-Hop Music, Black Gay Men Who Rap, by Xingling Li, Music 780.86 LI. Hip-hop has at times been a difficult genre for LGBTQ+ voices to rise to the top, but recent years have seen strides toward better representation. Xingling Li's book takes an academic approach to the topic. This material was part of his doctoral work, exploring the spectrum of voices throughout the history of hip-hop to the present, interpretations and representations of masculinity, and how these musical movements have grown nationally and internationally. In particular, he explores a path through hip-hop where gay MCs have found ways to express their own kind of masculinity without being feminine or attacking femininity. The book feels especially well-timed, in that a lot of the concepts it introduces have become a greater part of hip-hop and popular culture in just the last few years, with the rise of artists like Lil Nas X and Frank Ocean. Vibrate Higher, A Rap Story, by Talib Kweli, Music 781.66 KWELI. There have been a number of great hip-hop biographies and autobiographies lately, and among the best of them is Talib Kweli telling his own story while centering the history and potential of conscious hip-hop in his newly published Vibrate Higher, A Rap Story. In the book's prologue, Kweli discusses the notion that many people's musical preferences are established by what's especially popular during their teenage and young adulthood years, and for him, those centered around the 1990s, when many conscious rap-related artists were very popular, such as Public Enemy, Queen Latifah, Lauryn Hill, and A Tribe Called Quest. By 1997, Kweli stepped out in his own duo with Mos Def, called Black Star. After that, he went on to release lots of well-received solo albums and collaborate with many hip-hop legends. And he did some legend-making of his own by letting a young producer named Kanye West on stage with him, around the time of his first solo album, Quality, who of course went on to become a superstar unto himself. This is a great memoir that I think most hip-hop fans will find interesting. Kweli's upbringing is a little different than many hip-hop artists, being raised by teachers with active interests in Pan-Africanism and Black cultural nationalism, which gave him the foundation to start thinking about social issues and politics throughout his life. When hip-hop became his calling, it was only natural that he would try to find ways to uplift his community through his art. Kweli jumps around in time throughout Vibrate Higher, contrasting memories of youth with epiphanies and experiences in more recent parts of his career, but it all flows together wonderfully. And for fans of literature and reading, I was especially touched at the story about midway through the book about the first thing that Kweli and Mos Def did with their income from the debut Black Star album. They bought Nkiru Books, the longest-running African-American bookstore in Brooklyn, and a place Kweli had worked. Even though their own careers were just getting started, they wanted to keep this store afloat in the face of the big chain stores and online book merchants that were threatening lots of indie bookstores at the turn of the millennium. This immediate turn towards supporting community is such a critical part of conscious rap and hip-hop culture, and you'll find many examples of it in action throughout this book. From the Streets of Shaolin, The WuTang Saga by S.H. Fernando Jr., Music 781.66 WuTang. There have been a few books written about the highly influential 90s hip-hop group, the Wu-Tang Clan, some even written by Wu veterans like RZA and U-God. But this new book by longtime hip-hop journalist S.H. Fernando Jr. is probably the most comprehensive look at the group's history and impact. Fernando Jr. wrote one of the first books published on hip-hop back in 1994, and he happened to spend a lot of time with the Wu-Tang Clan during their heyday in the 90s, making him the perfect biographer for the hip-hop supergroup. If you're not intimately familiar with the Wu-Tang Clan discography, this book is a great place to start, as Fernando digs into their first 2 albums and all of the solo albums in between, at a song-by-song level. More broadly, it creates a detailed context for all of the group's work, charting the early days of hip-hop in New York City, history of the city and its neighborhoods, and the history of the martial arts films that were a massive inspiration for the group. You'll come away from this book knowing not only about all things Wu-Tang, but a lot about the roots of hip-hop culture altogether. And yes, the book includes the 2015 saga that got them into national headlines, when they sold a single and only copy of their Once Upon a Time in Shaolin album for $2 million, making it the most expensive album ever sold and landing them in the Guinness Book of World Records. So there are just a few examples of great books you can check out for all kinds of cool perspectives on hip-hop music and culture. Be sure to stop by the Polley Music Library to check out these and all kinds of other books about hip-hop and all kinds of other music genres.